Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Renee Mera. Thank you so much for joining Zoom in with Renee. Today, my guest is Dawson Church. He's a thought leader, scientist, researcher, author of Bliss Brain, Genie in the Genes, EFT Manual, and Mind to Matter. Dawson is also the editor of a professional peer-reviewed journal, Energy Psychology, Theory, Research, and Treatment. Thank you so much, Dawson, for joining me from California.
I am as happy as meditation can make me.
Let's talk about Bliss Brain. You talk about remodeling the brain, reprogramming the brain to bring it back to a space of creativity, compassion, joy, and of course, bliss, as the name of the book suggests. How do we go about it, especially when the mind is so much into the default mode network, which is always ruminating over the past, over analyzing what happened before, what's going to happen in the future. So we're never in the present. And with all the stressors that we have, how do we get back to getting that bliss? I think you have a personal story that you want to share with our viewers, how this book came into being.
Yeah, and that question, if there's one question to ask ourselves, that is the question, because we have these brains that evolved over the course of billions of years, and they evolved to protect us from threats and detect danger. And so our minds are looking around all the time. Our senses are scanning the environment. Our brains are highly aware of everything going on around us. We're looking for problems that we can solve. And so there are threats to the environment. We focus on them, and our ancestors only lived to the extent that they were able to detect those threats and respond to them. So we have all this equipment in our brain to do that, and we no longer live in an environment in which there are beasts and all kinds of environmental challenges ready to zap us at any moment. And so in the absence of all those things, our brains just scan the horizon looking for anything that's wrong. And in modern human beings, that's worry. And so how do we retrain ourselves to counteract 14 billion years of evolution and then shift into happiness? And that's been the big question since the Buddha onward. So, I've been focused on that myself personally because I grew up pretty unhappy. I joined a spiritual community at the age of 15 years old. I was studying the perennial philosophy that underlies all the religions and looking for answers in my own life. And when that didn't go very well, and again, most spiritual communities have a lot of their own challenges, as did the one I was in, I turned to psychology. And I then became a student of psychology and studied Gestalt therapy and psychodynamic therapy and all kinds of other therapies, looking for the answer there. And then over the course of years, gradually, as I shifted my search, I began to focus on the brain, because if we can shift that preoccupation of the brain, then what psychology calls the negativity bias, then we can make ourselves happy. But it took me a long time, and only when I was in my 40s did I finally begin the practice of meditation every single day. And that really was the big game changer for me. So after all those years of dabbling in meditation, finally daily meditation and an absolutely consistent practice was the big game changer for me, so that when other things happened in my life, like the one you referred to, which was a cataclysmic event for me and many other people, when there were these huge wildfires that blazed through Northern California between 2017 and 2019. And in one of those, my wife woke me up in the middle of the night. The alarm clock was blinking 12:45 a.m. I looked outside. There was a wildfire just sweeping down the opposite hill toward our home. And we had just seconds to grab our shoes, throw on some clothes, our cell phones, and drive out through the flames. And so in the years after that, again, daily meditation made all the difference. I was meditating, I was using EFT tapping, and I was able to recover really quickly from the trauma of losing my home, my office, all my possessions in just a few minutes. And it's not like you meditate and everything is perfect. We all have issues in our lives we have to deal with. But if you do have a practice of using energy therapies like EFT and EMDR, and you're meditating every day, you have a core of resilience then. And Renee, that core resilience is then able to help you when you have a financial disaster, a relationship disaster, a natural disaster like a wildfire or a flood. Then you have this core resilience. And research shows that 2/3 of people actually have what's called post-traumatic growth. They're able to grow through disasters. So I found this is true both on the macro level of the research I do, and also on the micro level of just me personally learning to, again, pull against that 14 billion years of evolution and actually create a happy life.
So when we talk about core resilience that we get by recalibrating ourselves, going within, taking that journey inwards and upwards, we get that calm and the equipoise. Whatever may be happening outside, we are not perturbed. And it's very difficult unless we really, with consistency and regularity, meditate and take that journey every day. And then we're able to get the balance in our lives, even though there might be, like what you had, disaster outside. So whatever is happening externally, we can't control, but we can control inside us. And that takes a lot of effort initially, because you have to make it into a habit. So how you do that, especially when we live in this fast track world where we're always on our internet, on our mobile devices, we don't have time. When we say, hey, we don't have time, we're so busy, those are the people who need to really be grounded. All of us need to be grounded, right? We know that science behind it says that meditation helps. It's used as an adjunct therapy for hypertension or for many medical conditions, nervous breakdowns, for grief and trauma. And you talked about EFT tapping, which I'm going to talk about a little later on. But how do we get into that mode and break from the default mode network of the mind?
It's really hard because, like, I look out the window and I have a bird feeder outside of my office window here, and I love seeing the birds land on the feeder and eat. And so when I eat, I bless my food, I pray, I practice mindful eating, I eat slowly, and I'm aware as I eat. When I watch the birds outside my window over here, they just land on the bird feeder and they peck away at the food. They're not eating mindfully. They're looking up, they're looking around, they're looking down. And the reason that they're not eating mindfully is that there's a cat that lives near us, and it hangs out below the bird feeder sometimes, and every once in a while it jumps up on the bird feeder and tries to grab a bird. And there's a hawk that circles overhead, and every once in a while the hawk dives down and it tries to grab a bird. So they're eating, but they're eating with their attention constantly out there for what might get them. And our minds are the same way. Our minds are unable to focus mindfully on eating or whatever we're doing because we're just distracted by all of the potential problems there are out there. Now, there are no longer mastodons and lions and tigers and poisonous snakes and hostile tribes ready to pour over the hill and spear us. But we are in this, our brains evolved in this environment in which all those things were imminent daily threats to our survival. And so when you have that focus on the outside world and you're looking for threats, how do you counteract it? And it takes practice. It takes, you mentioned effort. There's one that I read a book a while back called Effortless Mindfulness. And I was thinking, well, yeah, you're effortless at a certain point, but initially it takes real effort. It takes real focus to stay that way. And so you want to practice before you face a disaster or a crisis. Like when I faced that fire and my house was swept away, I'd been meditating for 20 years every day before that. And so that gives you a basis in that. And so maybe you think you're busy, but if you don't cultivate these habits early, then when a crisis comes, you don't have them. But I'll tell you one other really good reason why a busy person should do this, and that's productivity. So for about 20 years, I was studying PTSD, and I published many clinical trials. I published a meta-analysis. I've done a lot of work, and if you look on the US government database of research, PubMed, you'll see my name on many studies. And so I did a lot of work on PTSD. But then after I focused on how we can cure PTSD, which is actually quite easy to do with EFT, I then focused my research much more on elevated states of consciousness. So a new generation of studies now is showing that we can reach these elevated states of happiness, of self-transformation, self-transcendence. And when we do that, the data is now showing that if you use an effective form of meditation for a month, 1 month, not very long, just 30 days, your productivity can go up by 20%. So in my primary, I've one very easy meditation program called a 21-day walk with your higher power. And this engages the potency of what we call relational spirituality. And having an abstract belief and having a sense of connection with something greater than yourself is really powerful. But if you have a relationship, if you cultivate love and the kind of emotional connection you have with a family member, and you have that kind of loving, connected relationship with something larger than yourself, that's called relational spirituality. So that 21-day program has you create that loving relationship with your higher power. And people going through that program in 30 days after they begin have a 20% increase in productivity. That means you are doing now in 4 days what used to take you 5 days. And so if you think you're too busy to meditate, really, this is your highest leverage point. How else will you get a 20% increase in productivity in a month? You do it with an effective form of meditation. And that argument really doesn't hold water. Research just shows that, for example, people who take breaks are more productive. People who spend time in nature are more productive. People who have a relational spirituality are more productive. So, we aren't meditating just to get good at meditation. We're meditating to get good at life. And then everything about our lives, our work lives, our family lives, our financial lives, tends to improve because we're regulated. We have learned emotional self-control. We are centering ourselves. We're calm. We're making much wiser decisions. If you look at the flow of blood in the brain, the person who's upset, agitated, worried, focused externally, their default mode network tends to be in high gear, especially the mid prefrontal cortex, which lies just behind our forehead. That part of the brain is on high alert. And when you look at, for example, monks and nuns who spent years meditating, those parts of the brain just calm down. And then wise parts of the brain, loving parts of the brain, compassionate parts of the brain, like the insula, the brain region that is associated with pro-social emotions, gratitude, happiness, joy, that part turns on. And in a large-scale randomized controlled MRI study of people doing, again, an effective meditation for a month, we showed that the default mode network was shutting way down, and the activity of the insula was dialing way up. And that was happening again in just a month. So it does not take years of effective practice for your brain start to change. Your brain is changing anatomically. And I can't stress this enough. This is not just some kind of thought shift. This is the anatomy. This is the structure inside your head that is literally remodeling itself in a month based on effective meditation practices. So it can make an enormous difference in your life in a very short period of time. And you don't have time to not meditate.
Have there been any clinical studies done on the 30-day meditation technique that you're talking about?
Yes, those two trials, one was a randomized controlled trial published in a top neuroscience journal. People doing that meditation was 22 minutes a day, a guided meditation I created, and the control group was doing mindful breathing, also using a guided track. And in just a month, we showed that their default mode network was dramatically reduced in activity, and their insula was dialed up in activity. So again, the pro-social emotion part of the brain was active and the default mode network was down. And this is a study published in one of the top neuroscience journals in the world.
Right. So we know that the inherent qualities of the soul is that of joy, peace, bliss, compassion. So when we are remodeling the brain, we are actually making the soul as a CEO so that the brain follows that. And that's how it's easy to remodel the brain and recalibrated to the pathways that it brings, the space of joy and bliss and the compassion that we feel for others.
Yeah, and it's so interesting too that I'm pointing to my forehead over here and I'm saying it's the default mode network and the mid prefrontal cortex that shuts down. And now in MRI studies, we're showing that's happening. And many people who do this say, "Oh, I'm feeling a tingling in this part of my head," and they point to the mid prefrontal cortex. But a century ago, Paramahansa Yogananda said, "Pay attention to the center of your head." Sant Kirpal Singh called that part of your body. He said that's the connection between your local, your immediate human consciousness and divine consciousness. And Ramana Maharshi also said that part of the head right over here is really important in spiritual growth. So all of these great sages have been telling us this for centuries, and now we have the equipment and we hook people up to MRIs and we see, gee, that is actually the part of the brain that starts to calm down. So science is now reinforcing what these great teachers have been telling us for a long time. And what it's also allowing us to do is it's allowing us to filter those ancient teachings through the lens of what works. So in Bliss Brain, I ask questions like, okay, we know there are literally hundreds of styles of meditations. There are moving meditations like, say, for example, a Buddhist walking meditation or Qigong or Tai Chi or yoga. There are some movement meditations. There are following your thought meditations. There are loving kindness, meditate meditations. So we know there are hundreds of meditation styles. And of all the things you can do when you sit down to meditate, what is going to produce the quickest neurological change? And it turns out that if you look at the MRI studies, there are three things that spark the most rapid shift, both genetically and neurologically. And so you want to make sure you're using a meditation that incorporates those three primary styles. And virtually any kind of meditation you can bring these three things in. One of these is community. That the research on Tibetan monks is absolutely clear. Those who meditate together have faster neuroplastic change in the brain than those that meditate in isolation. So we have this romantic image of the hermit in the cave in the Himalayas or the desert fathers in Christianity out in the desert alone. But research is just super clear that those monks that meditate in a group, that meditate together, are having the quickest change in their brains. We don't know yet whether virtual meditation has that effect. That's research that has yet to be done. We do know that group meditation has an effect. The second of those three characteristics that sparks the fastest change in the brain is meditating with intensity. So I mentioned earlier relational spirituality. So you read the writing of Rumi or St. Catherine of Siena or St. Teresa of Avila or Rabia Basra, a great Islamic saint. And these are Hafiz, these are passionate people. They aren't just sitting there on a meditation cushion quietly. They are, in Rumi's case, they're dancing wildly and spouting crazy poetry while he does it. So this is the intensity that you want to have, because research shows that if you have intensity, it's going to spark quicker change in your brain. And then the third characteristic, again, this is just, again, applying the lens of neuroscience to these ancient practices. The third thing that produces the quickest change in the brain is compassion. And compassion meditation just produces faster change in these circuits than any of the other styles of meditation. So whatever meditation you do, even if you're doing, say, for example, a movement meditation like yoga, or you've decided to follow your thoughts, or you're following counting breaths. I mean, there are so many styles, but weave compassion into it, because compassion, again, is one of those things that neuroscience shows produces the fastest shift in neural function and the fastest change in brain anatomy. And we know now from science that these ancient practices can be filtered through the lens of what works quickest and have you feel that wonderful sensation of well-being fast. It does not have to take 10,000 hours or 10 years to get someplace.
Right. And I think when we meditate together in the family or when we meditate in groups, the positive energy that is emitted is so strong that it just spreads that aura all over. And so we're in that orbit of positivity. And I think that creates a a feeling of wellness. And so important to meditate together sometimes to get that healing for all of us.
Yeah, I love to just imagine all people meditating in the world at the same time. And so when I sit down and meditate, I just tune into the fact that there are hundreds of thousands of people right now, day and night, in various time zones all over the world. Who knows that there are life forms on other planets? Renee, maybe they're meditating too. And so all of these people meditating, and the idea that we meditate together is so powerful. And the world seems chaotic, and there are lots of things to focus on that are going wrong, and that are cause for despair. And then you tune into meditation. Also, in chapter 7 of Bliss Brain, I look at all the research on trends in the world. And there are a lot of positive trends in the world, and people tend to focus again on the negative things that are happening right now, day by day. But the long-term trends in the world are overwhelmingly positive. And one of those is the number of meditators. And so we know from data, and I asked myself this question, like, what percentage of people in the world are meditating? And it turned out that there was data from the Centers for Disease Control, CDC in America, from the European Medical Center for the European Union. And then there was data going back to the 1300s and even the 1100s in England, France, Germany, India, and China. Because again, India and China were these huge, well-organized empires around 1000 AD. And so they collected data. And so we have some notion, even going back 1,000 years, of what percentage of people were meditating back then in all these countries. And it turns out, Renee, there's this number that pops up in all these studies, and that's 1%. 1% of the people, it looks like, throughout history, as far as we can tell, in all these cultures, there 1% of the population were involved in spiritual pursuits of some kind, and often that was meditation. So 1%, 1%, 1%, going back 1,000 years. Suddenly, 2005, it's 4%. Between 1980 and 2005, it quadruples the number of people meditating. Today, it's hitting 20%, according to the most recent CDC numbers in developed nations. So there is an explosion of people meditating in the world, and they're providing this counter narrative of well-being, of human thriving, which is why on so many metrics, human beings are doing better than they ever have been doing in the whole of history.
I want to move on to EFT tapping. You talk about in your books that we can engineer our genetic destiny, and we don't have to have the same script in life. We can change the script to heal ourselves, especially when it's to grief or trauma. And we say, well, it's in my karma, but we can make ourselves feel better in that moment with self-healing. So share your views on that.
Yeah, so EFT is very simple. You just think of something that you're unhappy about, could be a past event, could be a future fear or worry. And while you're focused on it, so you focus on it intensely. And while you're focused on it, you then tap on a series of acupuncture points. And what that does is it sends calming signals to the brain. And what we see in research is that when you're thinking about those negative events, your emotional brain, your limbic system, gets highly active. So fear, stress, worry, guilt, blame, shame, anger, resentment, all the litany of negative emotions, all of those things are producing an activation in the middle of your brain, your limbic system. And we can measure this using tools like EEGs and MRIs, heart rate variability monitors. When you are highly emotional, when you're stressed, it affects your entire body. Your digestion shuts down, immunity shuts down, heart speeds up, your lungs are contracting faster and harder. So all these things are happening in your body when we're stressed. A lot of them are mediated by the hormone cortisol. And I've done several clinical trials, some very large-scale trials of cortisol. And what happens when we're stressed too is we turn on a gene, a series of genes actually, one of which is CYP11B1. And that's the final gene that juices our body to make cortisol. So we have a stressful thought, our limbic system turns on, our emotional brain turns on, sends a signal to the part of our body that produces cortisol, turns on that CYP11B1 gene, we make less of cortisol. And now we're flooded with cortisol, we go into fight or flight. That's where most people are spending many of their days, many of their hours every day. They're in fight or flight mode, not because there's a tiger in the room, just because they're thinking a negative, stressful thought. So that's the usual human pattern. When we tap on acupuncture points, all of that goes into reverse. We see the emotional brain just calm down, and all that activation goes away. Our breathing deepens, our heartbeat goes down, our digestion fires up again, our immune system reactivates, and we then decrease activation and engagement and expression of that stress gene, CYP11B1, and we turn on another gene called CYP17A1. And that is the gene that codes for DHEA. And DHEA is our main cell repair hormone. So now we've switched gene expression. We've literally, with the thought, by turning from negative thinking to positive thinking, we have literally turned off CYP11B1 and turned on our DHEA gene, CYP17A1. So we've changed our genes just by thought, by spiritual experiences, by enthusiasm, by love, by gratitude, by generosity, by altruism. All of these things are literally producing changes in our brain and our bodies, and we are way healthier as a result. Just one epidemiological study. Epidemiological studies are studies of large population samples. And this particular one was a huge study, and it showed that over a long period of time, that optimists live. So just the trait of optimism, just thinking positively about the past and future, being an optimist, is associated with a longer lifespan of 10 years. You get 10 years more by being optimistic. So all of these positive emotions are producing radical shifts in genes, in your brain, and over time, in your health span and lifespan. And EFT is one of the things that is super effective at reducing stress. Literally, we'll have people who are stressed, they'll start tapping. Like I had one young man I worked with, and in fact, I'm going to show you what happened with him. Was I was sitting with this guy doing EFT in a room, and someone else in the room who was watching had a water bottle, and they took their water bottle while I was working with this young man who was a veteran. He served 4 tours of duty in Iraq. And this person in the room, while we were talking, this man and I were talking, this veteran and I were chatting, this person in the room did this.
Wow.
Absent-mindedly with a water bottle. And this Iraq veteran was about to dive under the table because he was so triggered, his PTSD was so activated by the sound of the crinkling of the plastic of the water bottle. And so that was, as I was first chatting with this veteran, we tapped on that sound, which reminded him of small arms fire and firefights in Iraq. We tapped on that. We tapped on gruesome scenes of people's being blown apart, overturned vehicles, children dying. I mean, it was horrible what these memories include. And we tapped on all of those things, at the end of which this young man was completely calm. So I helped found an organization in 2007 called the Veterans Stress Solution, and we do free EFT with veterans. And to date, we've offered it to over 22,000 veterans with PTSD. And we've led the adoption of EFT as an officially sanctioned therapy in the Veterans Administration in the US. And so all of these things now mean that tens of thousands of veterans have got EFT. They then lose all those symptoms, and they again can start to lead normal lives. So EFT is the fastest stress reduction method that I know.
So tapping over here,
yep.
over
That's
here.
It.
Yeah.
Yeah, just tapping acupressure points.
This way. Yeah. And do we do that every day, in the morning, evening, or is it when somebody's going through a lot of stress or a lot of tension, and at that point tapping really works?
Yeah, whenever you're stressed. So meditate in the morning. That's going to calm you down and give you a baseline of well-being. So meditation is the morning practice. Tapping is the daily practice, 2 minutes whenever you feel stressed. So maybe you are feeling great after meditation, and it's 8 in the morning, you're going to work, and then by 10 a.m. it's all fallen apart you've had an argument with the bus driver on the bus ride, and you have a colleague who says something miserable to you, and you get an email from a client, and they're all angry. So now it's 10 a.m. and you're all emotionally dysregulated, and your stress response is kicked in. Tap. That's when you tap, get yourself back to that baseline of well-being. Do that throughout the day. So you may be tapping 3, 4, 5, 10 times a day. It takes 2 minutes, and suddenly you just lose all that tension, and you're back to feeling that baseline of good, of feeling good.
Does it matter? It can go from here to there, or from, it has to go in a sequence. Does it really matter?
You usually just go, there are 13 points all in all, and you usually just go from the top of your head down to the spleen meridian under your arm. And you may need to tap several times. Like sometimes you tap once and you calm down. Other times you have to tap 3 or 4 times, and then you finally calm down.
You want to show our viewers exactly the sequence of tapping?
Yeah, you start on this is the small intestine meridian on the side of the hand. And the first thing you do is you think about what bothers you, give it a name, and you score it on a scale of 0 through 10. And so is it a 4, a 6, a 7? How emotionally triggered are you when you think about this bad thing that happened? And so you give yourself that number initially, because people's numbers drop quickly with EFT. We want to get a number first. So you think about it, and focusing on it and getting a number is going to light up all those neural pathways in your brain. So while they're lit up, you then tap on each of the points. You start with the small intestine meridian on the side of the hand over here. You then tap on the governing meridian on the top of the head for a few moments. You tap on the bladder meridian over here, gallbladder, side of eye, stomach, under nose, end of the governing meridian under the nose, on the chin, the central meridian, the kidney meridian under the collarbones over here, and finally the spleen meridian under the arms. And you focus intensely on what's bothering you. And usually in one of those spots, you're going to feel a big drop. Like I was working with a lady the other day who was afraid of going in water. She was snorkeling, and she just was afraid of going in water that she couldn't stand up in. So she was standing in the shallow end at the beach. And I just did some tapping with her. After tapping with her a little bit, she was out there swimming in the deep part of the bay. So no fear at all. Just took away her fear. So you find people's fears very rapidly decrease as they tap.
So if you gave the number like 9 or 10 out of 10, and by the time you finish tapping, it's probably like 1 or 0.
A 1 or a 0, sometimes it's a 2 or a 3, because it takes a while for our brains to integrate the fact that we've healed. So we train people in EFT. We have the world's largest EFT training program, and we train practitioners, we train parents, we train teachers to use EFT. And it takes about a year to get thoroughly trained in EFT. You can just do the basic routine yourself without any training at all. But for using it with other people, you need to take a training program, and that process takes a while. But usually people are able to tap and rapidly see a drop in numbers. Where you need to work with a trained professional is with, if you have PTSD, traumatic stress, persistent issues. We find that things like weight loss, like there's a lot of research on EFT and weight loss. And when people are able to break their cravings with tapping, which is quite easy to do. So they break their cravings for oxytocin, Oxycontin, or alcohol, or food, whatever they're addicted to. And so that, again, you work with a practitioner on a persistent issue like addictions or self-sabotage. But for simple things, just tap yourself and your numbers will come way down.
We can't control the situation we are in, but we can definitely control the attitude towards that situation by becoming more emotionally stable. So that's how you're changing the life script and engineering the genetic destiny in the way to bring you self-healing. Do we have any studies done on this, on EFT tapping technique and the benefits of it in the clinical research?
Yeah, it's one of the best studied methods in all of psychology. And there are about 150 studies or review articles published in peer-reviewed medical journals or psychology journals in the English language, another 100 published in different parts of the world. Like there are a lot of EFT studies that have been done in Egypt, in Iran, in the Philippines, in Turkey. in various other countries as well. So there are a lot of non-English language studies, and there are about 150 in the English language as well. And that number is growing all the time. So they're very elaborate studies. Were done with MRIs and EEGs, with genes. And that's really amazing that all these genes are changing. Our cortisol is dropping dramatically. In one study that I did, I was a participant, I was a co-author of a study looking at the physiology and the physiological changes, blood pressure and heart rate with EFT. And in 1 week of doing EFT on traumatic stress, these were people who were using it for childhood trauma, major life trauma, but we found their cortisol, their baseline cortisol level, daily cortisol baseline dropped by 37%.
Wow.
So remarkable results in clinical trials. When their cortisol dropped, their immune response rose over 100%. They had over 113% to be exact, amount of immune molecules in their mucous membranes to guard their bodies against bacteria and viruses. So there's a ton of research on EFT, and you can go and look at the research pages, see the research that's relevant to you, but it's effective for autoimmune diseases like psoriasis and fibromyalgia. There's, again, research on many different conditions, physical and psychological, on the EFT research pages.
Any new book coming up?
I'm really intrigued by how we rewire the brain. And the big, I think, focus of advanced neuroscience is going to be brain rewiring. Now, we've known since the 1950s and the work of Marion Diamond, she was the very first researcher to demonstrate neural plasticity, that the brain can change and grow. For 100 years before that, we thought the brain was pretty much fixed in adulthood. But then there were human studies in the 1990s showing the brain could remodel itself. But what is now becoming apparent is the brain can remodel itself really quickly. Mm-hmm. In my book, Bliss Brain, I have one image from a scanning electron microscope of two neurons that are firing together. And so they're firing together, they're kind of shaking and vibrating a little bit as they fire, and then they get closer and closer together. And in the last frame of this image, they touch and intertwine like this. So they go from here, firing, to wiring. And that whole process, Renee, between here and here takes 12 seconds. So in 12 seconds, you are starting to create new hardwired neural connections. If you hold that positive thought, that loving thought, that conscious thought, that mindful thought, that grateful thought for 12 seconds, you're creating a new neural bundle. The problem with that is if you're holding that angry thought or that resentful thought or blame or shame or stressful thought for 12 seconds, and you may be holding it for 12 hours or 12 days or 12 years, you're creating a whole lot of neural wiring around that too. So we want to be creating neural wiring. And the new research, the newest research in neuroscience takes advantage of this to actually help people rewire their brains quickly. So that one landmark study that I did shows that in 30 days, you start to rewire it. But in my newest book and a new book I'm writing now, I'm focused on how we activate these circuits in our brain that have to do with well-being. And there are four distinct circuits we have to activate. One is the emotion control circuit. We have to learn to control our emotions. And there's a circuit for that. We have to learn to reduce our obsession with ourselves and move into compassion and altruism. So you need to dial down your self-obsession. And there's a circuit that does that. There's an attention circuit, and people who are meditators tend to develop the ability to pay attention. And there's that circuit. And the fourth circuit is the pro-social emotion and compassion circuit. So you activate those four circuits in turn. In my new book, I'm exploring all the four circuits and developing exercises to actually, like we go to the gym and you work out your quads and your biceps, your triceps and your deltoids. You work out each of these four circuits.
And this is the internal gym we're talking about.
The internal gym of the brain. And they get be strong. And your happiness level, like we measure gamma waves in the brain, which is the signature wave of happiness, they go up sevenfold. You have 7 times the amount of happy gamma in your brain after you've done this. So you have a dramatic rise in happiness. That's why my current book is called Bliss Brain. You're just super happy once you do this stuff.
Yeah, you're going from like maybe 16 to 18 hertz to 4 to 10 hertz. So the thoughts go down, the frequency is different, and we're in a very different calm state. And that's where Bliss Brain comes in.
Yes. And it's very possible it's doable in 30 days.
Well, thank you so much, Dawson Church, author of Bliss Brain, Mind to Matter, Gening the Genes, and EFT Manual. I'm Dr. Renee Mera. Stay healthy, stay positive.